So today, 17 years ago, my father passed away. It was the day before his birthday. Tomorrow is his birthday. I can't believe it's been 17 years ago, but I was pregnant with my third child, who's about to turn 17 when he passed. So it must be 17 years since he passed. So just taking a moment to honor his life and his passing and my paternal lineage. And I thought I would read you the story that I wrote in 2016, and it's called My Father Wasn't at My Birth. My father wasn't at my birth. My mother had hoped for and planned a home birth for my entrance into the world, but she was a single mother living in a communal house in Switzerland at the time. She was considered to be an older mother at the time. She was 29 when she fell pregnant with me, and was advised against giving birth at home by her doctor. The man of the house that she was living in was also dead set against having her birth in his home. There was no way that African girl was going to squat down and birth in his house. My mother then found out about a natural birthing centre in the neighbouring canton of Graubünden, and while she drove to take a look at it and loved the pink rooms and the deep birthing pools and the midwives in attendance, there was no one who was willing and able to drive her there once she was in labour. So she settled for the very fancy and exclusive private hospital at Stephanshorn. I found out later on that a bunch of friends basically chipped in and paid for her to be able to give birth at this private hospital. My father wasn't at my birth. I was a planned pregnancy, very much so. I was very much hoped for and wanted, but it was an unusual arrangement of sorts. I'll let you in on a little secret. You see, my father was married to someone else when he met my mother, and he stayed married to his first wife. My parents actually never married, while embarking on a relationship with my mother. My mother was a staunch feminist at the time and had all sorts of theories about different ways of having relationships, and so they embarked on an open relationship, which my father's wife was actually rather reluctant about. So the plan was for my father to impregnate my mother, and that she would be a single mother, and that he would be a long-distant parent and visit once a month or when time and travel allowed him. My father lived in England and in South Africa at the time. My father wasn't at my birth. He was in England at the time, at home with his wife. My mother was admitted a week before her due date to be induced for no medical reason other than that her doctor was going to be away on holiday. She was admitted on my father's wife's birthday, which his wife always saw as a personal affront to her and made her resent my presence even more. My father wasn't at my birth. A friend drove my mother to the hospital, but my mother was alone when she went into labour with me. I know that she laboured for 12 hours and that she had the latest in fetal heart monitoring technology strapped to her while she laboured. I know that she laboured on her back. I also know that she held on to a little green verdite statue, a little bust of an African woman. It had been given to her by a grateful woman my mother had counselled when my mother had volunteered as a rape counsellor in South Africa. I know that this little statue was a lifeline back to South Africa for my mother while she laboured. I've got it here, I'll show it to you. There she is. She sits by my bedside now. This was my mother's doula while she laboured in the hospital by herself. My father wasn't at my birth. He was in England at the time, at home with his wife, and while she hung out a load of wet laundry, he snuck a call to my mother and shouted instructions on how to breathe through the heavy black phone. I know that he irritated my mother and that she was relieved when he had to go and she could return to her own rhythm. She had found a way to relieve her pain by breathing out for as long as possible and making her lips loose while she did that. Kind of like this, like a horse. After 12 hours, she gave birth to me, a girl. I weighed 5 kilograms and I took to the breast easily, apparently. My father wasn't at my birth, but he arrived the following day and examined me thoroughly. He was concerned that my toes would be bent and gnarled like his, and he was comforted to find that this was not the case. He then announced with relief that I was only slightly pigmented. My mother was classified coloured. My father was classified white. Their relationship had begun in South Africa, and the fact that they were a mixed-race couple now with a child made it difficult, if not impossible, for them to continue their relationship in South Africa, and was one of the reasons I was born and raised in Switzerland. My father wasn't at my birth. I did not grow up with him in the way most children grow up with their fathers. I never lived with him except for a short stint when I was 7 and the apartheid government had changed its laws and my parents came to South Africa and rented a house and tried living together. This did not last long. He was always a regular part of my life though, and he visited and sent gifts, and we visited him, and he phoned on birthdays and Christmas, and I know he prayed for me. 26 years later, my father was dying of cancer. It had spread to his bones and his blood. I found out 2 weeks before he died, and I spoke to him on the phone. He was jolly as ever and told me that he loved me. I was pregnant with my 3rd child at the time, and I could not fly to be with him. I had not seen him for 6 years, and he had never met any of my children. My father wasn't at my birth, and I wasn't there when he died. That was 17 years ago today, the day before his 80th birthday. My father wasn't at my birth, but he was very much part of my life, and he always will be. Thank you for listening.